Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome. The quick developments in Iraqi cities indicate that attacks continue to target U.S. forces. A spokesman for the United States Army confirmed that one U.S. soldier from an airborne division was killed by a bomb near the Sunni Triangle west of Baghdad. Meanwhile, 4 Iraqis were killed, one of whom was a police officer, and 2 U.S. soldiers were wounded in violent operations in Souq and Abu Ghraib, in the western region of the capital, Baghdad. As these events are unfolding daily, America intensified political efforts to convince international organizations not to be intimidated by the so-called terrorist threats after several organizations announced that they will be withdrawing some of their staff from Iraq. Japan confirmed it will continue to send more Japanese self-defense units to Iraq to conduct humanitarian work, despite the United Nations' decision to withdraw its employees as soon as possible from Baghdad. A spokesman for the Japanese government, Yusuf Yakuda, announced it planned to send self-defense units to Iraq by the end of the year. At a separate press conference, the head of the defense agency said the Japanese plans to send units to Iraq has not changed and that they will be sent to southern Iraq and not to the areas where some attacks are taking place. Meanwhile, in the early morning hours today, despite lawmakers' fears of raising dangers and increasing expenditures, the United States House of Representatives finally approved a measure in the amount of $87 billion. The bill aims to finance the United States forces' presence in Iraq and reconstruction for 1 year. After 3 months of deadlock in the peace process, Israelis and Palestinians say that they have begun negotiations. Nabil Abu Radina, an advisor to the Palestinian president, said there is communication between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. He stressed the need for conducting real talks based on reviewing the peace and the roadmap. This came after Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon made statements saying that the talks between the two sides have indeed begun and that Israel is prepared any time to enter into negotiations with the Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Qurayah. The United States Army is trying to raise the morale of their soldiers in Iraq by providing entertainment to help them overcome their fears and depression. The United States soldiers in Iraq have reached a degree of despair unexpected by the army officers or even the military leaders in the Pentagon. The United States military administration in Iraq is currently preoccupied with raising the morale of their soldiers. The United States Army is trying to provide some sort of entertainment at the army residential complexes. However, the problem persists, especially for those who are seeking relief outside of Iraq or are escaping military service altogether.
I can't sleep without help. I take sleeping pills. I can't sleep without help. I take sleeping pills and antidepressants.
These soldiers live in constant fear of explosions targeting them, where they can lose their life at any moment. Nevertheless, there are other factors that contribute to their abnormal lifestyle, such as the high temperature in contrast to their snow-covered hometowns. They are also homesick, and some are doubtful of their presence in Iraq. All these factors explain the experience of U.S. soldiers in Iraq.
We are concerned about many things, but our biggest concern is the expectations that no one can predict, but the soldiers' future will be improved, and this could help calm their fears.
Reading a newspaper, taking a break to reflect on things or playing games are ways for soldiers to pass the time while waiting for their administration to come up with an agreeable solution to raise their morale. Israeli sources reported today that Defense Minister Shaul Mufaz will conduct talks with the Palestinian officials next week. Israeli Army Chief of Staff Moshe Ya'alon is criticizing extreme security policies toward Palestinians, saying it does not yield the desired results. These developments affect Sharon, who changed his position concerning negotiations with his Palestinian counterpart. Ariel Sharon's apparent shift in position, opposing the exclusion of Yasser Arafat, reflects that he is aware that this move may well yield harmful results for Israel, but he remained vague about the fate of the Palestinian leader. Once again, Sharon is talking about negotiating with Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Correa at any time after Abdul Ala is seated on solid ground. Sharon claims that the absence of high-level negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians is due to the Palestinians' inability to stop what he called a wave of terrorism. Sharon's remark came amid disagreements with Army Chief of Staff Moshe Ya'alon concerning the policies he is practicing against the Palestinians. Ya'alon advised that more lenient policies should be adopted, such as lifting the curfew on the calmer Palestinian territories and the transfer of some areas to the Palestinian authorities to encourage Korea.
We are not against any contacts, but we must return to negotiations and implement the roadmap plan. Until now, we have not seen any serious advancement from Israel.
Sharon will visit Moscow on Sunday to conduct talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Moscow is presenting to the Security Council a draft resolution on the roadmap, and it hopes the resolution will pass next week when the new Palestinian cabinet is declared. On the ground, the Israeli police tightened their security measures on the first Friday of the holy month of Ramadan, restricting Palestinians from entering the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque, except for worshippers over 45 years of age. At the entrance of Bethlehem, the Israeli forces fired tear gas, warning Palestinian worshippers on their way to Jerusalem for Friday prayers.
لصلاة الجمعة.
While Iraqi officials welcomed the Madrid conference for donor countries, economists and academics were surprised to learn that parts of the grants were transformed into loans. They criticized this action because they expected some of the Iraqi debt to be cancelled, not expanded. After a month of intensive studies and numerous meetings, the Madrid conference for donor countries was concluded.
I did not expect these kinds of numbers. I think that the organizers expected the conference to generate $50 to $60 billion. However, only $33 billion was pledged, and about half of that amount is in loans. Iraq can't afford to take any more loans because it is heavily indebted and burdened with a lot of interest. Iraq's economic situation in the long and short term does not permit for taking more loans, resulting in the burden of more interest and loan payments.
One question that confronts us wherever we go: who is in charge of the reconstruction?
We do not know how the money was spent during the last 3 or 4 months. There was no transparency in the way the money was handled. Did Iraq really get $33 billion in loans and grants? And what are the guarantees provided?
If some of the donor countries that participated in the Madrid conference, such as France, Germany, and Russia, cancelled about half of their loans to Iraq, totaling $130 billion, then the conference could have been successful. Iraqis welcome any financial support, as long as their dignity is preserved and their resources are not exploited, while demanding public and official participation to avoid embezzlement and wasting money. Jawad al-Hattab, Al-Arabiya, Baghdad.
U.S. occupation forces and Iraqi police stepped up security in Baghdad following warnings about fresh attacks after Monday's coordinated bombings that targeted the International Committee of the Red Cross headquarters and Iraqi police stations. Mounting insecurity has led the United Nations to follow the steps of the ICRC and temporarily evacuate its foreign employees from occupied Iraq. Upset by the decision, American officials said terrorists were successful in driving some international organizations out of the country.
The Iraqi capital braced itself for fresh attacks on Friday following a warning from U.S. occupation consular officials. This atmosphere that followed Monday's coordinated attacks on the International Committee of the Red Cross and several police stations led the United Nations to decide to temporarily pull out its foreign employees from Baghdad following a similar ICRC announcement. The UN move would involve some 30 expatriate staffers based in the capital and would operate as normal in northern Iraq. In all, the United Nations has around 60 expatriates and some 2,000 local employees.
I would also like to stress that this is a temporary relocation, and it's part of an ongoing process. It's of a constant review of the situation on the ground given the volatile conditions there, and that it does not represent a policy decision to disengage from Iraq.
The bombing of the United Nations headquarters in Baghdad and that of the ICRC led U.S. officials under President George W. Bush to justify their occupation forces' failure to provide security in the war-torn country. U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld argued that bombings cannot be prevented, admitting that the bombers have a factor of supremacy on U.S. forces. Rumsfeld expressed his concern over the recent attacks.
It may be an isolated spike. It may have to do with Ramadan. It may have to do with an increase that will continue in incidents. That's possible. And none of us can predict the future.
It may not be completely unprecedented, but it's pretty unusual that a target would be the United Nations or the Red Cross. I think may be the first major attack on the Red Cross. And it just shows the nature of the people we're dealing with.
Addressing anti-war countries France and Germany to put aside pre-war disagreements, U.S. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice claimed the United States has no desire of ruling Iraq. The confusion within the Bush administration and its strange way of portraying situations was clear, especially after Bush himself said Wednesday that the world would be more peaceful and more free under his own leadership. Between Rice's words and Bush's bold declaration, the Iraqi people are becoming increasingly resentful of the U.S. occupation. This has prompted the U.S. State Department to send 24 more diplomats to supplement 53 other diplomats on the ground in Iraq to boost the U.S. image. Critics say that calling in more diplomats goes parallel with calling in more military troops into Iraq, underlining both a diplomatic and military failure to appease the occupied Iraqi people.
And U.S. President George W. Bush's administration is currently under criticism at home for awarding contracts to U.S. companies that are well connected to government officials, such as Vice President Dick Cheney. The multi-billion-dollar contracts would have drawn billions already. Two congressmen questioned one of the contractors, the Halliburton Company, over it overcharging for gasoline imported into Iraq.
U.S. contractors with multi-billion-dollar contracts to rebuild occupied Iraq enjoy influential military and political connections. Researchers at Washington-based watchdog group, the Center for Public Integrity, said the contractors are the same donors who gave more than $500,000 in donations to U.S. President George W. Bush's 2000 campaign. U.S. agencies seem to be paving the way for U.S. firms with political connections to exclusively draw a lot of cash from Iraq. Halliburton Company is one example. The oil services company, once headed by now Vice President Dick Cheney, scooped up the biggest contract, $2.3 billion to support the U.S. military and rebuild Iraq's oil infrastructure. The company said Thursday that its profits rose fourfold and sales leapt 80%. Lawmakers said the company was overcharging for gasoline imported into Iraq, and two Democrat congressmen demanded an explanation. But Halliburton chairman Dave Leeser denied the allegations, saying the company won the Iraq contract because of its record and not for its political connections. Cheney denied any role in the company's contracts as well. But the issue turned controversial as many deals were not put out to tender. Attempting to cover up the issue, contract issuing agencies like the Pentagon and the State Department said needs were too urgent to allow for time-consuming competitive bids. State Department spokesman Richard Boucher said people in senior positions have no influence and the decisions are made by career procurement officials. He said the contracts are evaluated for technical merit as well as for the lowest cost. Boucher said 10 firms were invited to compete for a contract ultimately awarded to California-based construction giant Bechtel Group Incorporation. But according to the Center report, Bechtel and other contract recipients have been well connected. The chief executive, Riley Bechtel, serves on the President's Export Council, which advises Bush on trade issues. George Shultz, who served as Secretary of State under then-President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, sits on the company's board of directors.
The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammed al-Baradei, said that Iran's declaration about its nuclear energy program looks to be comprehensive. Iran had until Friday to provide full disclosure of its nuclear program, which Washington alleges is a front for building an atomic bomb. Last week, Tehran handed over to the IAEA a dossier with information insisting the current program is peaceful. The IAEA says there has not been enough time to verify the report. Iran is allowing UN inspectors to examine thousands of imported uranium enrichment machinery parts. The UN agency is to begin writing a report on Iranian compliance.
I think we are making good progress. Iran have submitted what they assured me to be a comprehensive and accurate declaration. We have our inspectors right now in Iran verifying that declaration. I will expect that next week they will send me a letter requesting that they will conclude an additional protocol, which also will be a very positive development. I think I could say that on first glance the report is comprehensive, but we still have to do a lot of fine-tuning. We still have to do a lot of questioning, and that's why we are there right now, and we will continue to be there doing an inspection for quite a few months, in fact.
The Palestinian Authority confirmed that official contacts were underway with Israel, but dismissed Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's announcement on these contacts as domestically motivated, as it came after his Army Chief of Staff General Moshe Ya'alon accused him of carrying out uncompromising policies towards the Palestinians. This caused a serious row in Israeli political circles, and in an apparent attempt to calm things down, Sharon said Thursday night that contacts were underway, but not with Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Qureh, and insisted his government was ready to negotiate at any time. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat's top advisor, Nabil Abu Rudaina, said the contacts have not yielded any results yet. Beyond these contacts, he stressed that the Palestinians' primary concern was the end of the Israeli aggression, a return to the negotiations table, and the implementation of the roadmap plan. The General of the Shikpi is the new nickname the Israeli media gave to Antoine Lahad, the head of the former Lebanese militia that collaborated with Israel. Lahad had no other choice but to open a restaurant and a bar in Tel Aviv. This was the only resort of the former commander of the so-called Southern Lebanese Army, who after years of collaboration was deceived, abandoned, and stripped of all his military degrees. This report was broadcasted on the Israeli television.
ומסעדה חדשה נפתחת הערב בתל אביב. אז מה העניין אתם שואלים? הבעלים של המסעדה הזו הוא לא אחר מאשר אנטואן לחד, מפקד צבא דרום לבנון לשעבר. על הקריירה החדשה של הגנרל, כתבתו של ציוננוס.
3 שנים יושב אנטואן לחד בתל אביב ומתגעגע. מתגעגע למשפחה שנמצאת בצרפת, לשם אסרו עליו להיכנס. מתגעגע ללבנון, אבל שם מחכה לו גזר דין מוות. אדם שהיה רגיל לפקד על מאות אנשים, להתרוצץ עם החיילים בשטח, להתחבר עם צמרת השלטון הישראלי. האיש הזה מוצא את עצמו כבר 3 שנים.
بدي محل يظل في اتصال مع الشعب الإسرائيلي ولذا لقيت أفضل شيء مطعم صغير مع بار مع كذا هذا بصير يظل في اتصال مع الشعب وأنا بتسلى عراك كوكتيل عراك
וכך מצטרף לחיי הלילה של תל אביב הביבלוס, לאונג' בר חדש של הגנרל לשעבר.
خلص الجنرالي هذا جنرالي كان جنرالي هلا ما في جنرالي بقى خلاص ما في جنرالي أنا أنطون لحد بس.
שמתי איקס על העבר, טוען מפקד צד"ל לשעבר, אבל גם 3.5 שנים שעברו מאז התמונות האלה לא ריככו את תחושת הבגידה.
مزقتونا وهربتونا وهربتوا انتوا قدام حزب الله وزقفت العرب كلها حزب الله كسركم وخذوا وصار حزب الله بالداخل حزب الله برضه ما حنكنش بداخلكم صار حزب الله.
16 שנה חי לחד עם החיזבאללה וניצל מאין ספור ניסיונות התנגשות. היום בתל אביב הוא מסתובב בלא הבטחה, לא חושש שהמסעדה תהיה מטרה.
اللي بيحب يجي واللي بيفزع انه يصير شيء ما يجي.
העם הישראלי בטוח לחד לא ישאיר אותו כאן לבד. וחוץ מזה, במטבח עובדים כמה מחייליו לשעבר, שלפחות יעזרו לו להתגבר על הגעגועים לאוכל הלבנון.
Mufti of Jerusalem and Whole of Palestine, Sheikh Akram al-Sabri, asserted that the Israeli occupation forces prevented more than 100,000 citizens from heading to the Holy Aqsa Mosque for performing the Friday noon prayer, adding that the Israeli occupation forces only allowed to approximately 60,000 worshippers to reach Al-Aqsa Holy Mosque. Meanwhile, the Supreme Judge Sheikh Taysir Tamimi denounced Israeli occupation practices in the holy city of Jerusalem and in preventing the worshippers to head for the Holy Mosque in Jerusalem. Tamimi added that the occupation forces' measures are violating the freedom of worshipping in addition to being an attempt to interfere in our worshipping affairs. The Supreme Judge urged the citizens to go for praying at Al-Aqsa Holy Mosque, denouncing Israeli breaches against the Palestinians and their one's leadership. On the other hand, Imam of Al-Aqsa Holy Mosque Sheikh Yusuf Abu Snene called on all Muslims of the world to help the Palestinian people in confronting the Israeli fierce attack against them. During the Friday ceremony, preacher of the mosque tackled the Israeli aggressive measures against worshippers, denouncing the Israeli occupation troops' barring of 10,000 worshippers from reaching Al-Aqsa Holy Mosque for performing the first Friday noon prayer of the holy month of Ramadan, urging citizens for tightening ranks, tolerance, and caring for each other. Israeli occupation troops boosted up their presence at the northern entrances of occupied Jerusalem and its adjacent towns and brought citizens younger than 45 years old from reaching the holy city to perform the first Friday congregational noon prayers in the holy month of Ramadan at the Holy Aqsa Mosque. Eyewitnesses said that the occupation soldiers were deployed between the uptown and downtown of Beit Hanina areas, as well as Al-Barid suburb and Iran town north of occupied Jerusalem. The Israeli measures led to depriving thousands of citizens living in villages and towns north and northwest of Jerusalem, as well as Ramallah and Al-Bireh, from reaching Al-Aqsa Holy Mosque. In Bethlehem, Israeli occupation forces restricted the movement of the citizens at Gila military roadblock on the northern entrance of the city. Meanwhile, Israeli occupation troops arrested Friday 2 citizens from Qalqilia during a large-scale incursion into Sofi neighborhood in the city center.
كشفت مصادر حركة السلام الآن الإسرائيلية النقاب عن خطط.
The Israeli Peace Now movement said that the Israeli government has plans to expand 2 Israeli settlements in the West Bank. One is Kami Shamron in the north, and the other is Kivat Ze'ev near occupied Jerusalem. According to Peace Now, the objective is to build 323 new housing units in these 2 locations, which means that 3,000 new settlers can be added to the hundreds of thousands of other settlers who were housed in Jewish settlements since the beginning of the Israeli occupation until today.
The issue of building more settlements was discussed a few days ago, and the decision was made to build 392 new housing units in the West Bank. This has been a consistent Israeli policy even after Oslo Peace Agreement, which was signed in 1992. Since 1992 until now, about 29,000 housing units were built. The number of Israeli settlers in the West Bank increased from 105,000 in 1992 to 236,000 settlers in 2003. Thus, building more housing units is an Israeli policy aimed at creating new facts on the ground and expanding the settlements which will eventually be annexed to Israel. Such proposals were suggested in Camp David, Taba, and the Geneva Accord. The new housing units will be built in Merkaz Etzion, Ma'ale Adumim, Givat Ze'ev, and the Ariel area.
The Israeli government, which does not want to stop constructing more housing units and expanding settlements, have proven to the world that Israeli officials are only trying to distract people's attention from the settlements activities. The Israeli government untruthfully justifies building the apartheid wall and maintaining their military presence in Palestinian villages, towns, and refugee camps under the pretext of protecting Israel's threatened security. But in reality, the objective is to change the demographic character of the Palestinian territories.
هذه سياسة إسرائيلية قديمة تبعتها منذ احتلال الذي
This is an old Israeli policy. Israel has adopted that policy since 1967 until today. However, now there is a dramatic increase in constructions of settlements. The objective of this policy is to impose new reality on the Palestinian people who live under occupation every second and moment and day. Israel believes the international community will eventually accept the settlement expansion and apartheid wall as facts on the ground.
مع مرور الوقت سيعترف بها كحقائق قائمة على الأرض.
ولو كانت الحكومة الإسرائيلية جادة بالفعل في تصريحاتها حول
The Israeli government announced that it is committed to the roadmap for peace, but it refuses to freeze settlement activities and dismantle more than 100 settlement locations required by the roadmap. In reality, the number of settlement posts is increasing, not decreasing. Every day, new housing units are being built. Ariel Sharon's government is known for its full support for settlers, which gave them a sense of security and confidence that their settlement will continue to expand. Khadr Shaheen, Al-Alam, Kivat Ze'ev settlement, located on occupied Palestinian land in occupied Jerusalem.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin,